At 8:59 a.m. on February 1, 2003, Space Shuttle Columbia began its descent toward Earth. 16 minutes later, it was gone. 7 astronauts disintegrated over Texas and Louisiana at 12,500 miles per hour. Debris scattered across 2 states. NASA called it a tragedy, an accident, an unforeseeable failure of foam insulation that struck the wing during launch. But here's what most people don't know. NASA knew something was wrong before Columbia ever re-entered the atmosphere. Engineers had flagged the problem. Requests for satellite imaging of the damaged wing were made and denied. Internal emails warned of catastrophic risk, and the people with the power to act chose not to. This isn't a conspiracy theory, it's in the official report. This is what actually happened in Columbia's last 16 minutes, and what NASA knew long before them. Chapter 1. The launch they should have stopped. January 16, 2003, Columbia lifts off from Kennedy Space Center at 10:39 a.m. On board 7 astronauts. Mission STS-107, a 16-day science mission, routine by shuttle standards. 82 seconds after launch, a piece of foam insulation roughly the size of a briefcase broke off from the external tank and struck the leading edge of Columbia's left wing at approximately 530 miles per hour. The impact lasted less than a second. The damage it caused would take 16 days to kill 7 people. NASA's debris assessment team caught the strike almost immediately. Launch camera footage was reviewed. Engineers at the Boeing debris assessment team ran impact simulations. The results were alarming. Their model, called Crater, predicted the foam strike had punched a hole through the reinforced carbon panels, protecting the wing's leading edge. They asked for help. Specifically, they requested that the Department of Defense use its high-resolution spy satellites to photograph Columbia's wing while the shuttle was still in orbit. The request was made 3 separate times. Each time it was either delayed, deprioritized, or quietly withdrawn under pressure from NASA management. Why? Because the working assumption at NASA leadership level was that even if the wing was damaged, there was nothing they could do about it. No repair was possible in orbit. No rescue mission could be mounted in time. So in their calculus, the calculus of men who controlled the narrative, knowing the full extent of the damage, served no purpose except to create panic. They chose not to know, officially, but the engineers knew, and they sent the emails to prove it. Chapter 2. The emails nobody wanted to send. On January 22nd, 6 days after launch, 10 days before re-entry, Boeing engineer Rodney Rocha sent an internal email that should have stopped everything. Rocha wrote that he was very concerned that management had not yet requested outside imaging of the wing. He warned that without better imagery, the team was in the dark about the true extent of the damage. He used the phrase big trouble to describe what might happen during re-entry if the tile damage was as severe as their model suggested. The email went up the chain. It was received, it was read, and it was not acted upon. 3 days later, on January 25th, a NASA flight director sent a reply email that has since become one of the most damning documents in the investigation. The message essentially communicated that since a rescue mission wasn't feasible and a repair wasn't possible, there was no point in obtaining better imagery. The situation was, in the words of the email, not going to be a factor during the deorbit and landing. They had already decided the outcome. The investigation would later call this a normalization of deviance, the gradual process by which an organization comes to accept dangerous conditions as normal because nothing bad has happened yet. NASA had flown with foam strikes before. Nothing catastrophic had resulted. So the assumption became it won't this time either. That assumption killed 7 people. Chapter 3. The 16 minutes. February 1, 2003, 8:44 a.m. Eastern Time. Columbia begins re-entry over the Pacific Ocean at an altitude of approximately 400,000 feet. The crew is strapped in. The shuttle is traveling at Mach 23. Plasma temperatures on the leading edges of the wings reach 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Under normal conditions, the reinforced carbon panels on the wing's leading edge act as a thermal shield, absorbing and deflecting that heat away from the aluminum structure beneath. But Columbia's left wing was not under normal conditions. At 8:48 a.m., 4 minutes into re-entry, the first anomalous temperature reading appeared. A sensor inside the left wing registered temperatures running significantly higher than expected. Then a second sensor spiked. Then a third. Then they went silent, not because the temperature had stabilized, but because the sensors had been destroyed. At 8:53 a.m., superheated plasma, the same plasma that should have been deflected by the intact heat shield, began penetrating the interior of the left wing through the breach. It was melting the aluminum structure from the inside. In Mission Control in Houston, flight controllers watched the data with growing alarm. Calls were placed to Columbia. The crew was asked about the temperature readings. Commander Rick Husband responded with a partial transmission. Roger, and then the communication cut out entirely. At 8:59 a.m., Columbia broke apart. Controllers initially thought they had lost communication. It took approximately 23 seconds before the realization set in. There was no communication to lose. The shuttle no longer existed as a single vehicle. Ground observers across Texas and Louisiana watched streaks of burning debris cross the sky. Sonic booms rolled across multiple states. In the cities below, people stepped outside to watch what they thought was a meteor shower. It wasn't. Chapter 4. What the report actually said. The Columbia Accident Investigation Board, the independent body assembled to determine what went wrong, spent 7 months reviewing every email, every decision, every simulation, every request that was denied. Their findings were devastating. The board concluded that NASA's organizational culture was as responsible for the disaster as the foam strike itself. The decision not to obtain better imagery of the wing was singled out as a critical failure. The board wrote that managers had treated the request for imaging as a nice-to-have rather than a mission-critical necessity. They identified a culture of deference to schedule and public perception over safety, a culture in which raising alarm was subtly discouraged because it created problems that were inconvenient to solve. The board also raised a possibility that NASA had dismissed entirely during the mission. Had the true extent of the damage been known, had the satellite imagery been obtained, and had it confirmed a catastrophic breach, a rescue mission using Space Shuttle Atlantis may have been possible. Atlantis was already being prepared for its next launch. With an accelerated timeline, the board suggested a rescue mission could theoretically have reached Columbia before re-entry. It was never attempted because NASA management had decided it wasn't necessary. 7 astronauts, Rick Husband, William McCool, Michael Anderson, Elon Ramon, Kalpana Chawla, David Brown, and Laurel Clark never came home. And the families of those 7 people spent years learning that the people responsible for their safety had received the warnings, had read the emails, had been given every opportunity to act, and had chosen quietly not to. Chapter 5. The pattern that never goes away. Columbia was not the first time NASA made this choice. 17 years earlier, on January 28, 1986 Space Shuttle Challenger broke apart 73 seconds after launch. 7 astronauts died. The cause: O-ring failure in freezing temperatures. Engineers at contractor Morton Thiokol had warned NASA the night before the launch that the O-rings were not rated for the temperatures forecast for launch day. Their recommendation was to delay. NASA management overruled them. 2 shuttles, 14 astronauts, 2 disasters that should never have happened. 2 investigations that reached the same conclusion: that the people with the power to act had been warned, had been given the data, and had decided for reasons of schedule and institutional momentum to proceed anyway. The Columbia Accident Investigation Board ended their report with a warning that was less a conclusion and more a prophecy. They wrote that without fundamental changes to NASA's organizational culture, a third catastrophe was not a question of if, it was a question of when. The Space Shuttle program was retired in 2011 without a third disaster. But the question the board asked, the one buried at the back of a 248-page report that most people never read, doesn't go away when the program ends. It follows every institution that has ever chosen convenience over truth. Every organization that has ever received a warning read it, understood it, and quietly set it aside. The emails existed, the requests were made, the data was there. They just decided you didn't need to know.